and welcome to Analysis with me, Jonathan Steele. Egypt's judicial system has shocked the international community once again. Death sentences for more than 528 people last month were startling enough. But then last Tuesday, a court recommended death sentences for another 683 people, including the Supreme Guide of the Muslim Brotherhood, Mohammed Badie. The sentencing came a day after a court pronounced the pro-democracy April the 6th youth movement that had helped ignite the uprising which toppled ex-President Hosni Mubarak in 2011 outlawed. All this 1 month before the planned presidential elections, which General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the leader of last year's military coup, is expected to win. Let's take a look at this report.
Has blocked the next batch of aid to Egypt in light of a recent wave of death sentences handed down by Egyptian courts. Senator Patrick Lee's statement follows talks held in the White House between Secretary of State John Kerry and the Egyptian Foreign Minister.
Egypt's constitution is a positive step forward. It has taken steps, and they are moving now to an election. But even as these positive steps have been taken, we all know there have been disturbing decisions within the judicial process, the court system, that have raised serious challenges for all of us.
On Tuesday, over 600 opposition activists, including Muslim Brotherhood leader Mohammed Badie, were sentenced to death by an Egyptian court. The defendants faced charges over an attack on a police station in Minya in 2013, during which a policeman was killed. According to witness accounts, relatives collapsed in grief after hearing the verdict. A large crowd chanted, "Where is the justice?" The speed of these hearings have been criticized by the United Nations and international rights organizations.
It's normal that the court would give the maximum sentence if the defendants or the lawyers didn't attend the trial, so it sentenced them to death in absentia. We will appeal and the death verdict will not be implemented.
The judge also commuted to life terms nearly 500 death sentences out of the 529 passed in March in a separate case. Also on Monday, a court banned a youth group that helped ignite the uprising that toppled Hosni Mubarak in 2011. The decision passed in Cairo to outlaw the April 6 pro-democracy movement was based on a complaint that accused the group of tarnishing the image of Egypt and colluding with foreign parties. Activists from the youth movement replied defiantly, saying the ruling will not affect the group's activities.
The regime is making a serious attempt at running the country with no involvement from any critical voices. This ban is an attempt to silence any real opposition, as we all know that the opposition that is shown on TV actually works with the government.
Flaminia Giambalvo, Islam Channel.
Well, with me in the studio to discuss the current situation in Egypt in the run-up to the presidential elections are Tamer Bargat, political and legal analyst, and Dr. Wafik Mustafa, chairman of Britain's Conservative Arab Network and author of the just-published book, Egypt, The Elusive Arab Spring. On Skype, we're joined by Mohammed Sudan, UK spokesman for Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood. Welcome to you all.
Pleasure.
Well, let me start with you, Tamer. I mean, how independent can you really say the Egyptian judiciary is at the moment?
I think, what may seem on its face value a fairly simple question, it's fairly complicated to some extent. There isn't really an immediate answer. What I would say is that, generally speaking, the Egyptian judiciary, like many other institutions, are fairly autonomous. And especially now, post the constitution that was passed earlier this year, it's actually become fairly independent on its own. Now, how that differs and is influenced by the political scene, I think is another question on its own. But when we look at the actual judiciary system, generally speaking, the judges themselves definitely will want to see themselves as fairly, not just autonomous, but fairly independent.
But then how can one justify, nevertheless, whether or not they're independent, sentencing 600 people for the murder of one person, one police officer?
I don't think that, to some extent, when you look at the judgments that have come out, I think they're fairly, ridiculous, I guess, for the lack of a better word. But when you look at the actual legal aspect of it, you come to realize that a lot of these judgments are just they're going to be all thrown out anyway. Because what happens in Egypt is once you've had execution cases at the primary or the criminal court, they'll then be appealed to the Court of Causation, which immediately will look at whether the right procedures and laws were followed. And in this case, the fact that most of those who got the sentence were, basically got it in absentia, means that in and of itself, the proper procedures were not followed, including Mohammed Badia as well. Even though he was captured and in jail, he was also in absentia when the judgment came down. So, in essence, what all this means is once it's appealed, and it has to be appealed based on the Egyptian judiciary and due process, it will probably get remanded to another court and will come in front of another new 3 judges.
Well, Mohammed Sudan, I mean, do you see any independence, in your view, in the judiciary at the moment?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Actually, there is no independent in the Egyptian judiciary since 65 years ago. This is exactly mentioned by the Supreme Judge Ahmed Mekki. This is what he said. Never been independent, but after the coup, here is the way. The Mubarak used to use the military court against his opposition, especially the Muslim movements or the Muslim opposition, for instance, the Muslim Brotherhood. When he failed to let the civil court to charge or to accuse his oppositions and send them to jail, and then when they acquitted, for instance, the last court was in 2007, for 40 leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood, and then he switched them to the military court. But Sisi, because he was head of the intelligence, the military intelligence, I think he used something very, very dangerous. He used to have some kind of scandals with the certain judges, and then now he used them. He never need to use the military court. Now he used the justice, the civil judges to send their oppositions in the jail for a lifetime or for sentences to death. Something, it's unbelievable. No one can believe this. I think those 3 judges in Armenia, Said Sabra or Ibrahim Walid or Talat Gouda, these 3 judges, I think that they are in trouble with the intelligence. It looks like that the military intelligence have a lot of dangerous scandals against them. Then they are just follow the orders. They never think about the regular process of the judiciary. They never look for the law or follow the law. No, they follow the order of the military regime right now, the military coup in Egypt. They have never been independent.
Well, Dr. Wafik Mustafa, you've looked at the history of Egypt in your new book, The Elusive Arab Spring. I mean, in addition to these 2 cases of the Muslim Brotherhood people, there is the case that we mentioned of the April 6th youth movement now being banned. We also have 3 Al Jazeera journalists, including foreigners, being held on trial with very flimsy evidence. Their case is never properly heard. They're not given bail. I mean, how does all this compare with the previous record of the judiciary under the Mubarak regime or even under the Muslim Brotherhood regime of last year?
I think the judiciary is usually, people say they are autonomous, they are independent, historically speaking, but the judiciary since 1969, that particular date is very important, where about 400 judges were sacked by Nasser, completely different after that. So last 40 years of judges are different creed, and they tend to be tied with the regime. And as you could see, they are very politicized. The way they treat, say, Mubarak's regime figures in court, and even the way they talk to them in Arabic, the way they respect them and say, sir, is totally different than dealing with people, say, Muslim Brotherhood, when they're very harsh in language with them. They're very harsh with people of April. They're so easy to hand down judgment or sentences 3 years to Maher, for example, this young man, and there's hundreds of of death sentences. I think the notion that these death sentences is just a threat, it by itself shows there's an abuse of power. If a judge knows that 9 out of 10, the sentence is not going to be implemented, so really, he's a fool. He is written not a proper judge because he knows he's messing up in the.
But then why does he do it?
That's what I said.
Or why does somebody tell him to do it?
I always think one thing, the software somehow of the system in Egypt, which we love to say, judiciary independent, military is independent, military is a strong, cohesive power. I think these sort of things have been sort of let the public to believe, or even outside powers. I think the fact of the matter is the judgment by itself, it shows how ridiculous it is to hastily sentence 600-700 people to death. I don't know how the judge think when he, in 2 months' time, these people will not be sentenced to this in reviewing the cases. It means he's not a good judge, to be quite honest, and so many of them.
But Tamar, during the Muslim Brotherhood period, which didn't last very long, of course, did the President Morsi's people try and appoint favourable judges, Islamic judges who were part of their own movement?
I mean, I think what's interesting is, you know, and it was something that was kind of alluded to some extent, is if we just take a quick step backward. What we look at when we look at the Egyptian institutions is you have almost a balkanization of all the different institutions, whereby it's not just necessarily moved by one individual, be it Mubarak or Sisi, or, you know, where one individual is basically waving their wand and all the institutions are in line. And we saw that battle, which a lot of people, you know, referred to as well as the deep state movement when you came to the constitution, where each of the institutions like to promote within themselves, be it the foreign ministry, the judiciary, Al-Azhar, the military. They like to have their own people. You kind of come from the young age, you grow up, you understand how the system works, which I think when you look at 2011 and we lost Mubarak and he stepped down basically in 18 days, the country kept moving. You know, there was light, there was water, all the institutions kept functioning, and that shows the independence of each of the actual institutions, which was something Sadat had started creating in the 70s. But then when you come about and look at, you know, the actual cases themselves, what you'll see is part of what this judiciary is doing is that they have their own, almost a corporate identity. The judiciary may seem to be independent, but the judges are not independent, meaning that when they come about with their own cases, they're reviewed, they're penalized, they have their own codes of ethics. In addition to that, what they've done now recently with the Prosecutor General, he now is being appointed by them. They regulate everything to the point that there's no checks or balances for them. This, to me, when I look back, coming back to your question, I see it as almost a full-on defense to maintain the institutionalization of the judiciary from potentially what they saw as the attack that came from Morsi's regime, whereby you had the Supreme Court justice. There was a law that was passed where you basically removed, I think it was about 8 justices, because I think there were 19, and the law came about saying, you know, based on certain age requirements, etc., it pushed it down from 19 judges to 11. What I find interesting is that even within Morsi's reign, what you find is the Supreme Court justices didn't, or the Constitutional Court justices, didn't really react in the manner that was expected. Now, whether it was because they foresaw the regime wouldn't last that long, or whether, you know, they just felt that it's no one knows where the change is going, and therefore let's just be quiet for now. But you had implementations of a lot of rules that came in and were being introduced under Morsi in order to try and change a little bit of what the judiciary looked like. You also had certain appointments also that were basically a little bit more friendly to the Muslim Brotherhood's ideology. And in addition to that, you also had, you know, for example, the 5 executive orders that Morsi came about, which defied all the laws, including the Constitution itself, which the judges were fine with to some extent, saying, well, You've had the executive decrees, you've now done the constitution, and you've voted on it. There's nothing really we could do about it. And so when you look back at the history behind it and you come about now, I think to some extent the treatment of the Muslim Brotherhood in court is almost as maybe some form of counter-revolution by some judges.
Is it flawed system, you think, or fair system?
I don't think it's a fair system. I think it's to some extent an abuse of power that you have. And I think the complete lack, I mean, I had voiced in several articles I had published the problem with the lack of oversight of the judiciary in Egypt. It's become very strong, stronger than it generally is. And there isn't really much of a checks and balance now. They create their own laws, they monitor themselves, they appoint their own people without any form of interference whatsoever. And I think all of that was almost a reaction, a knee-jerk reaction that went a little bit on the extreme side based on the fact that they saw the Brotherhood over the 1 year under the former President Morsi as potentially trying to shake up this whole system for them, which was unthinkable. And as a result, I think all of these lashings are coming out. Now, what this judge is doing, I completely agree. Why give judgments knowing that you haven't followed due process, procedures, or really implemented the law rightly, knowing that you'll easily get overturned? It's no question about it. I don't know. I mean, there are rumors that...
Do you think judges should be tried themselves? Or should be... Because I've never seen a judge being tried in Egypt. I mean, they pass a sentence of death sentence and next 6 months will become 2 years. So there's so much variability that I worry about the competence and the honesty of the judges.
I don't think it's necessarily tried because, you know, once you put trials of judges, you're then interfering with the system of how and where and, you know, a judge should do a case. They're not above the law, but what they should have is how they're being selected. And they have, the judges do have a Supreme Council of judges, of the very senior judges who are supposed to basically implement ethical issues where you could lose your license as a judge. So the question may be, rather than saying tried, is, you know, the whole system may need rejiggering, whereby you need to implement, you know, better codes of ethics, push the judges themselves to use a higher threshold of, you know, judging each other's characters.
Well, let's bring in Mohammed Sudan again. I mean, how do you think that the judges could be made more genuinely independent, more professional, more competent, and not subject themselves to ridicule sometimes, as they seem to be doing now?
I want to say something about the judiciary in Egypt. You know, in the era of Mubarak, he used to deprive the judges in Egypt just to let them do whatever he wants to do. That was in bequest the sons of the daughters of these judges, and then they can go to the judiciary system as a prosecution without being qualified for this. This is number one. Then number two, that he used to give them lands for very, very cheap prices, and also he used to give them a lot of advantage, like buying cars with no interest and a very large time to pay the terms, and something like this. Even though he could not, and also to let them a retirement age to be 70. He changed many times. Then he tried to prick the judges by that way, even though sometimes they did not obey them. But and they still independent. I'm not saying all of them independent, but some of them, they were not independent, and they have followed the orders from Mubarak, especially for frauding the election, especially the last parliamentary election in 2010. It was like 100% being fraud, and that was escalating the anger in the Egyptian people in that time, and maybe that one of the reasons to start the sparkle of the 25th January revolution in the 2011 year. Now, after Morsi came, and he tried to purify the judiciary with new law for the judiciary, without helping for the clean supreme judges, for instance, Ahmed Mikki or Mahmoud Mikki, or whatever, they're at the top of the judges in Egypt. And he tried to stop the bequest in the judiciary. He tried to stop maximize of the wages to them and not to leave the judiciary and work for instance, for banks, something like this, and then they get a very high salary. He tried to stop all of this. And in that time, he became, and also to change the general attorney of Egypt. And that way, I think the judiciary became an enemy for the Morsi's regime. They do not want to purify the judiciary. They want to keep going in that way. And from that moment, then I think that they participate the conspiracy with the team of the military coup to start in the date of June 30th or the July 3rd in 2013. By that way, and now they are keeping going with the military coup. Whatever the all of them, then they follow. Not all of them, but now it's plenty of judges, because if we talk about these recent court verdicts for the Armenia, for 529 people sentenced to death, and then the 683 sentenced to death too. But these judges, we have in this week also, they send a lot of protesters 83-year sentences and 44 or 43-year sentences. It's something you never believe it. It's unbelievable. Then
all right, I think I'm sorry to interrupt. We've had to. We're coming to the end of the first session. We'll continue afterwards, and also be looking at the international reaction and what John Kerry in the United States and others have said about it, and whether any sanctions are likely to be put on the Egyptian government as a result of the latest events. So stay with us.